No man wants damaged goods, the station agent said, loud enough for the whole platform to hear, and turned his back on her like she was a crate nobody had paid for. Iris Bennett stood in the dust with her carpetbag in one gloved hand, the veil over the left side of her face trembling in the wind. Behind that thin black lace, the burn scar ran from her temple to her jaw, pale and puckered. A map of the night 4 years ago when a house in Ohio had gone up in flame and she had gone in after a screaming child instead of running the other way. Nobody on this platform knew that part. They only knew the scar. The man who'd sent for her, a wheat farmer named Otis Greer, 60 pounds heavier and 20 years older than his letters had let on, had taken one look at her lifted veil and gone the color of curdled milk. That ain't what was promised, he said to the agent, as if Iris were a horse with a bad leg. Letter said comely, said healthy. I am healthy, Iris said. Her voice didn't shake. She had trained it not to, the way she'd trained her hands not to shake either, though right now they wanted to. Greer didn't even look at her when he answered. Put her back on the train. A ripple went through the small crowd gathered to watch the mail-order bride step down. Women in bonnets, men chewing tobacco, 2 boys perched on a fence rail like crows waiting for something to die. Nobody moved to help her. Nobody moved at all except to lean in closer, the way people leaned toward a fight they weren't going to stop. The heat pressed down like a hand on the back of her neck. Dust devils spun lazy circles at the edge of the platform. Somewhere a hammer rang against iron, steady, indifferent to her ruin. Tickets one way, the agent said, not unkindly, just tired. Train doesn't come back through till Thursday. You'll have to wait at the boarding house. I don't have money for a boarding house, Iris said. I was told I'd be met. You were met, Greer said, and found wanting. Laughter, low and ugly, from the fence rail boys. Iris felt the burn along her jaw begin to throb the way it always did when shame ran hot through her blood. An old wound remembering new pain. That was when the horse stopped at the edge of the crowd. A big roan gelding, lathered from a hard ride, and on its back a man in a duster gray with trail dust, a week's beard on his jaw and eyes the flat, careful color of a rifle barrel. He didn't dismount right away. He just looked at Greer, at the agent, at the small crooked smiles of the boys on the fence, and something in his stillness made the laughter die. There a problem here? He asked. No problem, the agent said quickly. Brides being sent back is all. Turned out unsuitable. The stranger's gaze moved to Iris last, and lingered there in a way that made her want to pull the veil lower, and made her, stubbornly, lift her chin instead. She looks suitable to me, he said. Greer snorted. Then you take her, mister, and good luck to you. It was meant as an insult, a dare thrown out to shame them both. The stranger swung down off the roan, slow and deliberate, boots striking the platform boards with a sound like a door closing on an argument. He crossed to Iris and stopped an arm's length away, close enough that she caught the smell of him. Leather, horse sweat, gun oil, and under it something like cedar. Name's Caleb Hollis, he said low, only for her. I've got a ranch 6 miles north and a house with an empty second chair at the table. I'm not going to pretend this is a courtship, but I won't watch a woman thrown back on a train like spoiled freight. Either. Your choice, ma'am. Not his. Not theirs. Iris stared at him. Somewhere behind her, Greer was saying something about foolishness, about a man not knowing what he was buying, and she understood, with a strange cold clarity, that they were still talking about her as if she weren't standing right there with a beating heart and 2 working hands. Why would you do this? She asked Caleb quietly. You don't know me. No, he agreed. But I know what it looks like when a whole platform decides a person's worth nothing, and I've been on the wrong end of a crowd's judgment before. Didn't care for it. There was something under those words, some old bruise he wasn't showing her yet. She filed it away. If I say yes, she said, what am I agreeing to? My name, my roof, my protection, Caleb said. Nothing more unless you want it. I'll not touch a woman who hasn't chosen it freely, and I'll not have anyone in this town treat you as less than a wife under my name. That's the whole offer." Behind him, Greer was already turning away, already forgetting her, the way a man forgets a debt he never intended to pay. The agent was writing something in a ledger. The boys on the fence had lost interest and gone back to throwing rocks at a bottle. Iris looked at the train that would take her nowhere, at the town that had already decided what she was, and at this stranger with tired eyes who had, in 30 seconds, offered her more dignity than anyone had in 4 years. "All right, Mr. Hollis," she said, and put her hand, steady now, into his. "I accept." He didn't smile, exactly, but something in his jaw eased. "Then let's go home, Mrs. Hollis," he said, loud enough for the platform to hear, and helped her up onto the roan behind him. Behind them, the whispers started before the horse had even cleared the station. A lie now spoken as fact, a marriage that existed only in the saying of it. Iris didn't know yet that Caleb Hollis had buried a wife 2 years before in a fire not so different from the one that had scarred her own face. She didn't know that his ranch hand Ezra would take one look at her veil and go pale as chalk. She didn't know that somewhere south, a man named Thomas Reeve was already asking after a scarred woman who'd escaped him a year back, and that the trail he was following led, inevitably, north. All she knew, riding north into a sky bruising toward evening, was that for the first time in a long while, she had chosen something, and someone had let her. The ranch house sat low and square against a rise of scrub pine, smoke curling thin from its chimney, a lantern already lit in the window though dusk hadn't fully settled. It looked, Iris thought, like a place that had once been happy and had since learned to hold its silence. Caleb helped her down from the roan without ceremony, and a man came out from the barn wiping his hands on a rag, older, weathered, one eye clouded pale with some old injury. He stopped short at the sight of her. "Caleb," he said carefully, "you mind telling me who this is?" "My wife," Caleb said, and the word came out steady, though Iris saw the muscle jump once in his jaw. "Iris, Ezra's foreman here. Been with me since before the war ended." Ezra's pale eye moved to the veil, to the scar visible beneath its lace, and something crossed his weathered face. Not disgust, Iris registered with surprise, but recognition, old grief surfacing like a fish rising to bait. "She favors her some," Ezra said quietly. "Around the eyes." "Don't," Caleb said, sharp enough that Ezra's mouth closed. But Iris had heard it. "She favors her." Meaning, she favors the wife who came before. That night, over a supper of beans and cornbread eaten in near silence, Iris studied the house properly for the first time. A woman's touch lingered everywhere and nowhere. Curtains sewn with careful stitches now faded. A hairbrush on a shelf that no one used. A child's rag doll tucked in a trunk she glimpsed through a half-open door and quickly looked away from. "You had a family," she said finally, when the silence had stretched too long to bear. Caleb set down his fork. For a long moment he didn't answer, and she thought she'd trespassed too far, too fast. "Wife's name was Sarah," he said at last. "We had a boy coming. House caught fire 2 winters back. Lamp oil, a draft, nobody's fault and everybody's, the way these things go. I was in the north pasture. By the time I got back," he stopped, started again. "I've buried people since. Buried men in the war before that. Never got easier, telling myself I should have been faster." Iris thought of the child she'd carried out of a burning house in Ohio, the weight of him in her arms, the scream of the timbers giving way behind her. She thought of the year after, when the child's father, her own husband Thomas, had looked at her ruined face across the supper table and told her she'd made herself unlovable on purpose, spitefully, to shame him. "Fire doesn't ask permission before it takes what it wants," she said quietly. "I know that better than most." Caleb looked at her then, really looked, past the veil to the woman underneath it. "How'd you get yours?" She lifted the lace away from her face without being asked, an act of will that cost her more than he could know. In the lamplight, The scar was fully visible. The pale, ridged skin, the way it pulled the corner of her mouth when she spoke. "A child in a burning house," she said. "Not mine. My husband's sister's boy. I went in because no one else would. I came out like this, and my husband decided I'd embarrassed him in front of the town. Called me spoiled goods to my face before he ever said it to a stranger at a train station." Her voice caught just once, and she steadied it. "I left in the night with what I could carry. Answered your advertisement because it was the farthest west I could find." The silence after that wasn't empty. It was full of things neither of them said, of a shared understanding that grief and shame could look like scars, could hide in a trunk, could ride 6 miles behind a stranger on a borrowed horse. "You were brave," Caleb said finally, "going into that fire." "I was terrified," Iris said. "I did it anyway. I've learned those aren't opposites." Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile, but the ghost of one, the first she'd seen. It was Ezra who broke the moment, appearing in the doorway with his hat already in his hand, his pale eye troubled. "Caleb." Ryder came through Miller's Crossing asking after a woman. "Burn scar, brown hair, goes by Iris sometimes, Eleanor other times." Offering money for word of her. Iris felt the blood leave her face. "Eleanor was my name before I left him. Man's called Thomas Reeve," Ezra said. Said he was her husband. Said she stole from him and run off, and he means to bring her back to answer for it." The cornbread turned to ash in Iris's mouth. She set down her fork with hands that would not stay steady no matter how she willed them. "He'll say I stole," she said. "I took $40 from a strongbox that was half mine by law, and I took it so I wouldn't starve on the road. I'm not proud of it, but I'd do it again before I'd stay in that house one more night." Caleb's expression had gone hard and still, the same flat, careful look he'd worn at the train station. "You want to tell me the whole truth of it, Iris? All of it now, before this goes any further. I stood up for you on that platform not knowing what I was standing into. I need to know what's riding this way." It was a fair demand. She understood that even as it frightened her. Understood that this stranger who'd given her his name deserved, at minimum, honesty in return. "He drank," she said quietly. "He struck me twice before the fire, and he struck me after, when he saw my face and decided I'd cost him his pride along with my looks. I didn't steal anything that wasn't owed me in wages for 4 years of marriage. If he finds me, he'll say otherwise to any lawman who'll listen, because he has money and I have none, and money talks louder than truth in most courtrooms I've seen." Caleb was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup slow between his palms. "Then we'd best make sure he doesn't find easy proof of anything," he said finally. "You'll stay. This is your house now, same as mine. I gave you my name at that station, and I don't take back what I give. But Ezra's right to warn us. If Reeve's asking in Miller's Crossing, he's 2 days out at most. You do this," Iris said slowly, "knowing it might bring trouble to your door? Knowing what people will say? A rancher harboring another man's runaway wife?" Caleb met her eyes without flinching. "I've buried a wife I couldn't save from fire. I'll not stand by and let another woman get dragged back into one by a man who set it in her long before it touched her skin. That's not charity, Iris. That's a debt I owe someone I couldn't save the first time." Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters, carrying with it the first far-off promise of a rider's dust on tomorrow's road. The dust came first, a smear of copper haze on the southern road, visible from the porch 2 full hours before the rider himself appeared. Iris saw it while hanging wash on the line, and her hands went still on the wet cloth, water running cold down her wrists though the morning was already hot. "Caleb," she called, and something in her voice brought him out of the barn at a run. He stood beside her, shading his eyes. "One rider could be nothing." "It isn't nothing," Iris said. She knew the set of those shoulders even at this distance. the particular arrogant slouch of a man who'd never once doubted his right to whatever he wanted. That's him. Thomas Reeve rode into the yard an hour later on a lathered black horse, dressed too fine for trail work, a pistol worn low and deliberate on his hip. He drew rein 20 feet from the porch and looked at the house, the barn, Ezra standing tense by the corral, and finally at Iris standing in the doorway with Caleb a half-step in front of her. "Well," Reeve said, and his voice was exactly as she remembered it. Smooth as river stone, cold underneath. "There she is. Eleanor. Or is it Iris out here? You always did like trying on new names, didn't you, like dresses?" "You're not welcome on this land," Caleb said. His voice hadn't risen, but something in it had gone very quiet and very final. "This land isn't yours to welcome or unwelcome anyone from where my wife's concerned," Reeve said. "I've got a warrant back in Millbrook for theft. $40 from my own strongbox, and I mean to see it answered." "She's not your wife," Caleb said. "She's mine. Has been since the station in town 3 weeks back, and every soul there can say so." Something flickered across Reeve's face. Surprise, quickly buried under contempt. "Bigamy, then. Ought to be 2 charges instead of 1. There's no bigamy where there was never a lawful marriage worth the name," Iris said, stepping fully into the doorway despite Caleb's hand rising instinctively to hold her back. "You struck me, Thomas. More than once. Any judge in the territory who looks at the scar on my back where you threw the lamp before the fire ever took my face will hear a different account than the one you're selling." The words landed like a slap. Ezra's pale eye had gone wide with understanding, and Caleb's jaw had tightened to something carved from stone. "You told me the fire did that," Caleb said quietly, not looking away from Reeve. "The fire did the face," Iris said. "He did the rest the night before I ran, when he threw the lamp at me and it shattered against the wall instead." Reeve's horse shifted. Unsettled by some current in the air, the animal understood better than the men did. "Careful," Reeve said, and his hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. Slow, deliberate, a threat dressed as casual movement. "I came for what's owed me. I'd rather not make it ugly in front of the lady, but I will if I must." "You'll not draw on my land," Caleb said, and Iris saw now that his own hand had found the rifle propped inside the doorframe, lifted it without seeming to hurry, the motion of a man who had done this before and hoped never to again. "You want to talk law? We'll ride to the marshal in town together, all 3 of us, and let him hear both accounts side by side. But you don't come on to my ranch and threaten my wife with a pistol on your hip like you've got any right left to her." For a long moment nobody moved. The wind stirred the dust at the black horse's hooves. Somewhere in the barn, a hinge creaked, thin and distant. Iris could hear her own heartbeat, could feel the old scar along her jaw pulsing hot with remembered fear. Then Reeve smiled, and it was worse than his anger had been. "Marshal in your pocket, is he? Fine. We'll do it your way, Hollis. But understand, I don't leave empty-handed twice. Not from a woman who humiliated me in front of my own kin, and not from some rancher who thinks a wedding lie makes her his to keep." He wheeled the black horse and rode off at a hard canter, back toward the southern road, dust rising in his wake like smoke off a grass fire. Caleb lowered the rifle slowly. His hand, Iris noticed, was not quite steady, though his voice had been iron throughout. "You should have told me the whole of it," he said, not unkindly, but with something raw underneath. "About what he did before the fire." "I was ashamed," Iris said. Her own hands were shaking now that the danger had passed out of sight, the way fear always caught up with her late, after the moment that demanded courage had already gone by. "Ashamed that I stayed as long as I did. Ashamed that a scar on my face is easier for people to look at than a scar on my back put there by a man's own hand." Ezra had come up onto the porch, his pale eye grim. "He'll go to the marshal first, before we ever get there ourselves. Man like that, he'll spin a story faster than truth can catch up." "Then we ride at first light," Caleb said. All of us. I'll not let him get ahead of this. That night, none of them slept easy. Iris lay awake in the small room Caleb had given her, separate from his own, a courtesy she was only now understanding the full weight of. Listening to the wind test the shutters, to Ezra's slow pacing on the porch below where he'd insisted on keeping watch, to her own heart still racing hours after the danger had ridden south. Near midnight, she heard Caleb's step in the hall and rose, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders, and found him standing at the window in the front room, rifle across his knees where he sat in the dark. "You should be resting," she said quietly. "So should you." He didn't turn. "I keep thinking on what you said. About the fire not asking permission. About a man throwing a lamp at his own wife and calling the burn her fault for existing after. You didn't have to defend me the way you did," Iris said. "Not after learning the whole of it. Some men would have called it too much trouble." Caleb turned then, and in the low lamplight his face looked older than it had at the train station, and something in his eyes had gone soft in a way she hadn't seen before. "Some men would have," he agreed. "I'm not built that way." And Iris, Sarah, my wife, she used to say a scar was proof a thing had lived through what should have killed it. I didn't understand what she meant until I watched you lift that veil at my supper table and dare the world to look away first. Outside, far off, a coyote called once into the dark, and was answered by another, farther still. Iris sat down across from him in the small circle of lamplight, and for the first time since the platform at the station, she did not feel like something waiting to be sent back. "Thomas won't stop," she said. "Not until he's made me small again in front of witnesses, the way he needs to. Then he'll find," Caleb said quietly, "that this house doesn't make people small. It never did before the fire, and it won't start now." They didn't ride to town at first light after all. A spring storm rolled down off the ridge before dawn, turning the road to a churn of mud that would have foundered any horse fool enough to try it. And so the ranch sat besieged by weather instead of by men, rain hammering the roof like a drumline with no mercy in it. Iris found Caleb in the barn near midday, mending a bridle by lantern light, rain drumming steady overhead. She'd brought coffee, an excuse more than a necessity, and he took the cup with a nod of thanks and made room for her on the bench beside him without being asked. "Ezra tell you," Caleb said after a while, not looking up from the leather in his hands, "that Sarah used to sit right here when the weather turned bad?" Said the barn felt more honest than the house. "House wants you to pretend everything's fine. Barn doesn't ask that of you." "I think I understand that," Iris said. She watched his hands work the leather, sure and patient despite the tremor she'd seen in them the day before, on the porch facing down Reeve. "You're good with your hands. Ezra said you built half this ranch yourself. Carpentry mostly. Some smithing." He glanced sideways at her, something almost shy in it, an expression that didn't match the man who'd stood between her and a drawn pistol the day before. "Made the crib for the baby that never came. Still got the pieces of it in the loft. Never could bring myself to burn it for kindling, and never could bring myself to finish it either." Iris was quiet a moment, turning her cup between her palms. "I lost a child too," she said finally, the words coming slow, like drawing water from a deep well. "Before the fire. Thomas said it was my fault, that I wasn't strong enough to carry a child to term, though the doctor told him different in private. I never told anyone that part. Not even my own mother before she passed." "I'm sorry," Caleb said, and it wasn't the empty courtesy of the phrase. She could hear that he meant it, that some old grief in him recognized the shape of hers and bowed to it. "I used to think," Iris went on, "that the scar was punishment, for not saving my own child, and then saving someone else's instead, as if the universe were keeping some cruel ledger. I know that's not sound thinking, but grief isn't sound, is it? It just is." Caleb set down the bridle. From his coat pocket he drew a small carved wooden bird, worn smooth with handling, and turned it over once in his palm before offering it to her. "Made this the week Sarah told me she was carrying," he said. Was going to be the first of a whole set, hung over the crib. Never got past the one. His voice roughened. I carry it because putting it down feels like agreeing she's gone for good. Fool notion, probably. Iris took the bird carefully, feeling the worn grooves of its wings under her thumb. The careful work of a man teaching himself patience through grief. It's not foolish, she said. It's the same reason I kept my mother's thimble through everything, even when I had to leave most of what I owned behind in the night. Some things aren't about sense. They're about not letting the ones we lost become nothing at all. Scars mean it lived, Caleb said quietly, echoing words that seemed to have lived in him a long time, unspoken until now. That's what Sarah told me once, about an old mare we had, all torn up from a wolf attack she'd somehow survived. Scars mean it lived, Caleb, she said. Don't go feeling sorry for a thing that's still standing. He looked at Iris then, steady, unflinching. I think about that every time I look at you. Something in Iris's chest loosened, some knot she'd carried 3 years without naming it. She set the wooden bird down carefully on the bench between them, not giving it back exactly, but not claiming it either, an offering left open. Caleb, she said, why did you really stop that day? At the station. There were a dozen other people who could have stepped in and didn't. He considered the question a long moment, rain still drumming steady overhead. Because I watched a town decide a person's worth on a single glance, he said finally, the same way this territory decided Sarah and I weren't worth saving that night the fire took her. When help came too slow because we were too far out, too poor to matter to anyone but each other. Couldn't fix that. I could stop it happening again in front of me to someone else. So I did. That's not charity, Iris said softly, repeating his own words back to him from that first night. That's a debt you're paying. Started as a debt, Caleb admitted. Isn't only that anymore. The rain had begun to ease outside, the drumming softening to a patter, and in the gentle light Iris found herself studying his face the way she hadn't quite allowed herself to before. The lines earned by grief and work both, the steadiness that had held even with a rifle raised against a drawn pistol, the gentleness in the same hands that had built a crib for a child who never came. He's not going to stop, she said, meaning Reeve, though the words came out quieter than a warning, more like a confession of fear she'd been holding alone too long. Whatever happens in town tomorrow, I don't think a man like that lets go of something he's decided still belongs to him. No, Caleb agreed. But you're not facing him alone this time. Whatever else is true between us, Iris, real marriage or paper one, that part isn't going to change. Outside, the storm broke fully, sunlight cutting sudden and gold through the clearing clouds, catching the wet boards of the barn, catching the small worn bird still resting on the bench between them like a promise neither of them had spoken aloud yet. Iris reached over and closed her hand gently around it, and did not let go. The marshal's office in town smelled of tobacco and old paper, and Thomas Reeve was already there when Caleb, Iris, and Ezra rode in at mid-morning, his fine coat brushed clean of trail dust, his story evidently well rehearsed by the confident set of his shoulders. Marshal Cobb, Reeve was saying as they entered, this woman fled my house with stolen property and a false name. I've come a long way to see justice done, and I'll not be made to look the fool by some rancher's charity. Marshal Cobb, a heavy-set man with tired eyes that missed very little, looked up as the door opened. Well, he said, here's the rest of the story walking in on its own 2 feet. Good. Save us all some guessing. Iris stepped forward before Caleb could speak for her, though she felt his hand steady at the small of her back, not restraining, just present. Marshal, my name is Iris Bennett, formerly Eleanor Reeve. I took $40 from my husband's strongbox the night I left him. Wages owed me for 4 years of marriage, and I'll not pretend otherwise or apologize for it. What I will not stand here and let him claim is that the scar on my face or the one on my back came from anything but his own hand and a thrown lamp, the night before I ran. Lies, Reeve said, too quickly, too loud. The fire scarred her. Everyone in Millbrook knows the fire scarred her. The fire scarred my face, Iris said, and her voice did not shake, though her heart hammered fit to crack her ribs. Pulling a burning child from a collapsing house scarred my face, and I'd do it again without hesitation. The scar on my back, Marshall, came from a lamp thrown across our bedroom the night before that fire, by a man who'd been drinking and decided I'd shamed him by speaking back to him at supper. I have that scar still. I'll show it to you or to any doctor in this town if it settles the truth of it. The office had gone very quiet. Ezra stood near the door, his pale eye fixed hard on Reeve. Caleb hadn't moved, but Iris could feel the tension coiled in him. Ready. Marshall Cobb studied Reeve for a long moment, and something in his weathered face had gone flinty. Funny thing, Reeve. Got a telegram 3 days back from a Millbrook doctor named of Whitfield, asking had anyone matching your wife's description come through these parts. Seems he treated a woman for a lamp burn along her spine some while back, and always had his doubts about how a lamp came to strike a body in such a particular spot, given lamps generally sit on tables and not on backs. Doctor's been troubled by it ever since, he said. Wanted it on record if she ever surfaced. Reeve's confident color drained by degrees, like water finding a crack in a dam. That proves nothing. Doctors speculate. Maybe, Cobb said. But it's enough to make me want a longer conversation with you than the one you were hoping for, mister, and considerably less interested in chasing your $40 than you'd like me to be. Meantime, this woman's a married woman under this territory's law, wed 3 weeks past to Caleb Hollis here, witnessed and recorded proper at the courthouse. I did the recording myself, in fact, and stand by it. Whatever claim you think you've got on Eleanor Reeve, you've got none at all on Iris Hollis. Reeve's jaw worked, fury and humiliation warring plain across his face. His hand twitched, just once, toward the pistol at his hip, and Caleb moved half a step forward, unhurried, immovable, putting himself unmistakably between Iris and any such notion before it could fully form. Don't, Caleb said quietly. Not in front of the marshal, and not ever again in front of her. You had your chance to be a husband worth the name, Reeve. You spent it a long time before that lamp ever left your hand. For a long, taut moment, nobody in the office breathed. Then Reeve's hand fell away from the pistol, and something in him seemed to collapse inward. Not remorse, Iris understood, watching him, but simple defeat, the recognition of a man who had run out of rooms to bully his way through. This isn't finished, he said, but the words came out hollow, already conceding. It is, though, Marshall Cobb said mildly. Get on your horse, Reeve, and get out of my town before I decide that doctor's telegram deserves a formal inquiry after all. Territory's got no shortage of jail cells for men who throw lamps at their wives. Reeve left without another word, his fine coat suddenly looking too small for him, and the sound of his horse's hoofs fading south was, Iris thought, the sweetest sound she'd heard in 3 years of running. Outside the marshal's office, in the clean bright light of a storm-washed noon, Caleb turned to her, and for the first time since the station platform, he did smile, small, uncertain, but real. You didn't need saving in there, he said. You did that yourself. I had somewhere to stand, Iris said. That's not nothing, Caleb. That's not nothing at all. He reached into his coat and drew out the small carved bird, offering it to her again, not as a memory this time, but as something new being built. I've got wood in the loft, he said, and time on my hands come winter. Thought maybe I'd carve a whole flock this year. Sarah always wanted more than one over the crib. Iris understood what he was asking without either of them having to name it plainly. A real marriage now, chosen freely on both sides, built from two people who understood exactly what it cost to survive fire and still choose to stand close to warmth again. I'd like that, she said, closing her hand over his, over the small worn bird between them. I'd like that very much, Mr. Hollis. Years later, the ranch north of town would be known simply as the Hollis place, its barn mended, its fences straight, and in the front room a shelf that had once held a single carved bird held a dozen instead. Each one made by hand in the quiet of winter evenings. Each one a small stubborn proof that grief need not be the last word on a life. Travelers passing through would sometimes hear the story from old-timers at the mercantile, of the scarred bride rejected at the station, and the rancher who'd called her his wife before it was true, and made it true not long after. And on the beam above the barn door, carved deep by two sets of hands one autumn evening, two names remained long after both had gone gray. Caleb and Iris Hollis, and beneath them, small and simple, the only epitaph either of them had ever wanted. Scars mean it lived.